Welcome to Authentic Living with Roxanne, a place where we have conscious conversations about things that really matter in our lives. And now here's your host, Roxanne Derhaj.
Okay, we're live. How are you today?
Good. How are you doing, Roxanne?
Patricia, it's so nice to have my first guest on my first live. I'm sure you know what happened last week, where my guest was a little bit stuck. So, well, I have to tell you the preamble because I think this is the best way to introduce what we're going to talk about today about being authentic online. So I'm going to tell you what just happened to Patricia and I. And this is going to be great for Patricia's business because we're going to all need this. So we're getting on Melon, right? Melon is the app we're using. Mm-hmm. And I'm not hearing her. So am I freaking out? Absolutely. But with Patricia's guidance, we were able to get up and be able to speak to you today. So thanks again for tuning in with us. And Patricia Regier, I'm going to say, is a friend. We have met a couple of years ago. We're both professional speakers with the Canadian Association of Professional Speakers, and she's a learning and development specialist. So Patricia just released a book, and I want you to check out this book. I just got it on Amazon. Oh my goodness. And it's one of those things that I realize I'm going to have to keep right next to my computer to be able to pick up as a quick tip based on speaking, on training, or just getting ready to go on a call. So Patricia, thanks for coming in today and spending the time with us on Chat with Roxanne.
Thank you, Roxanne. I appreciate the invite. It's such an exciting week launching my very first book, The Online Shift, and it is packed with pro tips, as you mentioned. And I'm really excited to be here just to talk about being online and being authentic. Thanks for inviting me.
So let's talk a little bit about, how does one become a learning and development specialist? It's not something. I was actually talking to a friend from Trinidad just before I got online. And him and I were talking about kind of what he does. And he's a leadership development trainer. And I'm saying, I'm a keynote speaker. When we went to school, these positions didn't exist back then.
No, I'm coming from 20 years. A lot of it was working in the nonprofit sector, different program management, development, leadership. But a lot of what I was doing was workplace training and learning and community education. And I just really loved that. I started with a BA in psychology and got into the sector of community services and helping services, but then went back to school for a Master of Adult Education. Because what I really loved doing, and I think is what is the basis of everything, communication, workplace, if you're leading a team or even sharing what services you offer, it all comes down to education and learning and being able to communicate that really well and work with the audience to turn them into participants is what I've been very passionate about. So that's part of what led me here. And then the last 5 years, building Regier Educational Services. And the last 2 years, when everyone had to shift online, I was just constantly helping everybody make that shift and giving pro tips and tutorials. So that's how the book came about. And that learning and development specialist in me is just sort of a lifelong journey.
So you're the consummate teacher. And I could tell you that in many a pinch, Patricia has helped me out when I did my very first online training with Harvard Business School. She was in the background, and this was at the beginning of the pandemic. And there was a lot of glitches, but of course, because she was there with my team, we were able to get through it. So let's talk about, I talk about authenticity. I talk about, kind of the return on relationship, which is the new book that's about to come out in the next 4 to 6 weeks. Let's talk about what it takes to be authentic online, right? Because let's face facts. Most of us don't want to get in front of a camera nor do we want to kind of think, oh, how do I look? I'm thinking about, oh, how's my hair, all that stuff.
Yes.
And then I got to think about the content that I'm going to talk about. So when you kind of think about authenticity from your frame as a learning and development specialist, what does it mean to be authentic in that space and be online?
Thank you for asking that, Roxanne. Yeah, you're right. A lot goes into getting prepared. And we're not always thinking about the connection with people. One of the first things I had to train myself when I started creating YouTube videos, and I actually put googly eyes on both sides of my camera for people to feel like you're actually talking to them and you see them, you have to look into the camera, which is a big switch from looking at each other in person. So there is some training ourselves to how we can connect online, how people feel like they're connecting with us. But being authentic is that genuine wanting to hear what and understand what people are going through, what they feel. So thinking about that learning experience journey before, during, and after, that they have the link, they feel supported, that people know that you're there not just to be talked at, but that you really care and want to connect. And we have to be quite intentional with how we design our learning spaces, but really just come at it first and foremost with that authentic, genuine, we want to connect, we want people to feel safe, and feel heard, and that we care in this space.
Of course. So we're talking about really the concept of psychological safety, right? Like to some degree, that's the space that I'm in when I'm training leaders to kind of get to that space within themselves to understand, if people are feeling unsteady, which is, I just got Patricia's book and I just started to read through it. And she talked a little bit about some of the little things that we wouldn't even think about, right? Like, sending a link to the platform they're going to be using ahead of time, just because, the assumption is oftentimes that if we're online, what being online is, but most people don't know. So something as simple as that, sending that out ahead of time. I just recently interviewed someone that works with introverts in leadership. And, he said, here's the extroverts, they fly in, they don't think about the agenda, and the introvert, and then the person that's running the meeting says, here's the agenda. And this is the first time the introverts are locking and loading on the agenda. And then, of course, what does the extroverts do? They kind of go with the flow, and they kind of pipe up and they give the perspectives. And the perception based on the lack of agenda is that they're not invested. And it's not that they're not invested. It's how they collate information accordingly to anticipate what's coming, from the space, right? So again, if someone is not aware what's coming, then what happens is that they're kind of distracted, or they feel negated, and not that the person running the meeting isn't, but they feel a bit negated and they don't respond. And then what happens is the leader thinks, here's someone that doesn't have buy-in.
Yes.
And in fact, they may have equally as much buy-in. So something as simple as sending agenda ahead of time, when kind of your team on the platform, allows the people that process information a bit differently to take it in so that they could kind of ingest and then in turn add value. So that's a good little tip that I hadn't really thought about, because I'm on the extroverted lane. But again, I can't just think about myself. I have to think about everybody that I'm speaking to.
Right. Everyone likes to receive information differently. What lights them up is different, and what makes them feel safe and connected is different too. So thinking about that, people feel prepared and feel supported. So I often recommend, when people come into a space, to go through the navigational pieces, because we can't assume that everyone has been on that platform or they know the new features. And it's a little quick way to make sure that people can interact and feel included and feel that they belong, and not feel silly or dumb that they don't know something. And sometimes people are coming in from different avenues, and they might not have that green checkmark option. So I often recommend too giving alternate options, come on mic or type in chat, or use your reactions if you have them, and activate closed captioning, like all the different things, and communicating that everyone that what they need, trying to cover it as much as possible.
And ultimately, you're talking about connection in a different way, right? So often, prior to the pandemic, Patricia and I would drive to Toronto to our meetings. So we had the opportunity in the car to kind of connect. And then all of a sudden, boom, March 2020 happens, and we're all of a sudden not seeing each other on until it's like 2D. And it felt contrived, it felt limiting, and all those things. So everybody in the world was going through that, and then people that had to communicate, be it family even. that was the most funniest ones for myself with my family, and trying to talk to everybody online. But even going into teams and having to all of a sudden, leaders that maybe potentially weren't good communicators to begin with, now then had to go off and start to use this kind of format. And of course, there was a lot of stumbling and bumbling for people to get through meetings. Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about what are some of the things that you see most people have problems at being on camera? Like you just said to me here, Roxanne, you're not in the middle. And I didn't even think about that, right? Like, so again, and she said to me, and I'm being very frank, hey, Roxanne, you need to be a little bit more in the middle, move down your camera. I'm like, oh, okay, Patricia, thank you. What are some of the other things that people can really kind of think of and these may seem basic, but they're not basic, as I'm sharing with you what Patricia just shared with me.
Right. I mean, and some things don't matter as much as other things. Those are things that might be behind the camera that, we have those conversations. When we're in that space, some people might not want to have their camera on. And that happens quite often, depending on the culture of a group. Certain organizations, that's what they're used to. And there might be other reasons too. There are different times during the last 2 years where kids might be running in the background. So we have virtual backgrounds or the camera's off. And to respect that, invite people to be on camera, create experiences where they want to be on camera, that they feel safe. But if we're recording, that can impact how people feel as well. Zoom has a new option with avatars that are kind of fun. Like there's different things. You have to know your group or get to know them, and create different spaces, but always that people can feel safe to do, on camera, off camera, and just get to know what they need as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think, I think of environments where there is a decreased level of trust. And then you have to go to the 2D format of camera, and we're not seeing each other where we can read the nuances of nonverbal kind of cues. And we got this, right? Yeah. So that takes a lot for us to really focus in. And are there things that we can do to let people know? Like you talked about the googly eyes. I like that. I should probably consider that. What other little things might people do that think, oh, I have to go on camera because I got to present on that report, and darn it, I don't want to do it. What are some things they could do to maybe help themselves relax or focus to be able to be on camera?
Well, when it comes to being on camera, especially at the beginning when people had to shift online, the only way we can get more comfortable sometimes is just by doing it. We have to walk through that being uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. Just like live streaming is a different element than recording. And the only way we can get more comfortable and stumble through the things that we need to learn is by doing it and walking through that. But if people are off camera, there's different ways we can still engage, whether it's the chat or coming on mic or the reactions and giving regular opportunities to respond. So we might not be seeing everyone nod their head, but they could be doing all the thumbs up. And it's just little touch points that if we regularly give those opportunities, we can, try to create more connections and make it meaningful too. It's important.
Just make it as meaningful as possible. And sometimes it's just sheer work that you have to get through a meeting or whatever. So anything that you can do to make people feel a bit more comfortable, that's important. Sending agendas ahead of time. Maybe starting with an icebreaker, let's talk a little bit about that, right? Because I know in your book, which I didn't get through yet, you were talking a little bit about icebreakers. So generally when, sometimes business meetings, you don't start with an icebreaker, but I think with Zoom meetings, in a way, it kind of means that, short of setting the context for the meeting, it could be something lighter, because generally when you see people in meeting, I might say, hey, Patricia, how was that launch last week? Right.
Right.
But it
Right.
might be kind of hard to jump into it if we don't have kind of something going on. So what might be something like a good example of an icebreaker?
You're right. That beginning part is really important. We never used to, when we were offline, in person in that way, we didn't leave people outside the door and open it just at the start of a meeting or a learning experience. So that's one of the things I'm very aware of too, to even before an icebreaker, to be either sending messages into the waiting room or open it up a little bit early, be ready to ask a warm-up question. One we just used with a client yesterday was, what does changing seasons mean to you as we enter into spring? Or what are you looking forward to? You can ask gentle questions, and navigate people of how they can type in chat or come on mic or camera. But we are missing that chit chat, which warms people up. And we have to be very intentional to ask a question. So that could be as simple. It doesn't always have to be a tech activity. To just really, icebreakers are warm-ups, are getting people comfortable with each other, starting the conversation. And it's really important to think about all those steps right at the beginning, because we're setting the stage for how comfortable people feel to interact and engage with the rest of our content.
Another thing that I heard is a good thing to ask, and it could be a good icebreaker, is to say to people, what were you doing just before you had to get into Zoom mode? That's an interesting. Well,
Yeah,
I was saying to my kids, here's 2 sandwiches, be quiet. And because mom's about to go online or something.
Yes.
It was actually, and you know what, it brought a levity, because how nice that, dad saying, okay, we're putting in front of the screen. I know we're over time.
Yeah.
However, you're getting 10 minutes and then I'm going to check with you again, that type of thing. So it really, I think what it sounds like, it replaces, Patricia, and tell me if that makes sense. I would think of when I was in corporate and we'd all know we were going into a meeting and everybody would either go get their tea or their coffee or a glass of water or whatever. And so we'd all kind of collide in with each other before going into the meeting. And it might, we might have a little bit of a, exchange there. We don't have those opportunities again to connect. So these little things allows the person to know, I want to know just what's going on in your world, even though we have to go into business mode for another, say, 60 minutes or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Giving those opportunities to actually connect and have that collaborative experience instead of, when it is a meeting, and if they're presentations or it's webinar style, it can be very passive and it just being talked at. And we need to definitely be very intentional in all a range of interactions online that we try to connect.
Yeah, for sure. So what we're trying to do is say to people, be yourself, but be yourself in a format. So for you and I, we've been, had to adjust how we do business, and we've had to be online. And I think of myself, I do these podcasts all the time, but they're live now, and it adds, you're right, it adds that additional element of, okay, now if I say something that I can't erase, that's a reality, and there's a bit of pressure. But then you think, well, what's the worst going to happen, right? Like, I mean, hopefully people would understand that it's live. So just trying to be yourself, figuring out what it takes to calm prior to going on camera. What about the concept of camera versus on versus off? How do you find that most people kind of decipher what's best if they're having to run a meeting?
Well, definitely facilitators and speakers that were used to being in person really like to have cameras off. That's how they feel. They want to get the pulse of how people are engaging with the content and the experience. But there are certain groups that are more camera off. So I think we have to be, get a little bit more comfortable with that. and create those opportunities of touch points with reactions in chat, come on mic, and find other ways to get the what used to be visual cues with the other types of cues, as well as is one way. And being comfortable too with the silence sometimes. Pausing when we ask a question to not try to fill up the space online, because we tend to do that a lot of times. We're uncomfortable with silence. And I, sometimes would jokingly have, a sound effect, but not everybody's not going to have, a sound effect to kind of break the ice and laugh about it when you ask a question, there's nothing. But, you can just say, I'm going to intentionally give you a moment to think and take, a sip of water, but give those spaces so that people can enter in, because they might be thinking about a response.
So lots of little things that you can think about, that just knowing your personality, kind of knowing where, if it's the first time, knowing that it's a maybe a team presentation, if it's a difficult situation, or let's say it's a team that's not functioning so well, there's going to be variances. What might a leader, if a leader is kind of maybe having to run these meetings, are there things that you think setting, like you said, there's certain things we talked about already. Are there other things that they maybe should be considering doing to prep themselves if they're uncomfortable already with the content they're presenting? Maybe there's a little bit of dissension within the team. Is there some things they might want to consider as well?
Well, getting to know the platform you're using and all the tools that are available is part of that process of getting ready as a leader online. Working with a team, having someone else help with that too, so that you can focus on the content, but even more importantly, on the participants. I talk a lot about turning an audience into participants. So it's that interactive, collaborative space. But part of it too is stretching that comfort zone a little bit. Being okay with trying something, whether it's an icebreaker activity or trying a new tool that may not be perfect. And that's okay, because sometimes people resist trying something because they want to be perfect, and then they're not actually using all the tools available. One of the quotes in the book is, we don't have to be perfect. We just have to do something we've never done before. And even, with live streaming, it's okay that, it's not going to be perfect for a while, and that's okay. We're still putting ourselves out in a different way. There's some magical thing when it comes to live and not pre-recorded, and going with the organic conversation. It's not scripted. It's just, that's okay, to really try to connect in a genuine way.
So there's so many things that I think, we've now, I think we've had to embrace being online, and it was kind of the thing you saw, like people had to do once in a while. Where do you think online learning, training, meetings, hybrid, based on all the work that you've been doing there, what are you seeing that's been the evolution 2 years in with these platforms?
Well, at the beginning, it was helping people get comfortable to be online, to understand the platforms, to feel comfortable and safe and be able to connect. A lot of people have grown through that and are a lot more comfortable. But technology is ever changing, and there's always a new aspect so that to facilitate more engagement, and to be open and ready to keep learning, be okay with the ongoing learning curve, but use it as a great opportunity. There's going to be time and space where online is, the perfect fit. Other times it's great that will be, offline and in person in that way. And that's really good too. So I think we can have the best of both worlds. And if we are going to hybrid with a blended audience, that takes a lot more intention. That's the next shift. So that we don't forget the online audience, and make sure that we intentionally give opportunities for both groups to interact with each other, and everyone feel that they belong.
Absolutely. And that's, I'll never forget. And when I worked in corporate, I went virtual at home, like in 2005. That's how, because we basically had the shift from, you don't have to be in person all the time, you can be at home. And I remember, I'll never forget, I went to Toronto to the corporate office. And so here I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to do this in person because I need it for me.
Yeah.
Or, and then they said to me, well, so I go up to the meeting room, I'll never forget. And they said, well, nobody's here. And I said, what? What do you mean nobody's here? So I had to then go down to my office and call in and talk about, and at the times I was in the room, the noise level in the room compared to what people were saying they were hearing online, right? Because everybody started to talk amongst themselves, right? And then the people online, all they could hear was these voices. So all these little things that years ago we hadn't thought through, and now we have to, like you said, if you're presenting online, it's one thing, that's one flat level, which hopefully we're still learning on there. But then if you're presenting in person, plus you have people east to west coast maybe potentially calling in, and you're the person facilitating the training, the meeting, how are you going to meander between both to ensure that everybody has a voice, everybody feels equally as important, and you as the facilitator knows what the expectations are of you. And what's needed. I think that's going to be a new skill where a lot of people are going to need help with as we go.
What you mentioned, it all comes down to expectations and clarifying the communication. So when we were doing conference calls and couldn't see people, it was really helpful for people to come on, unmute, and say who they were, say their name before they started speaking. Just like online too, if we're doing a round table, which is another one of those icebreaker warm-up times that can be very important if you're with a group for a series, for each person to have an opportunity to speak for a moment, for someone to say the next person's name, so you're not all just sitting there, who's going to talk next. Because when we're around a physical table, you go in order, and everyone knows the expectation that the next person speaks. So when we're shifting to different contexts, we just have to communicate different things so that people know what to expect. It's more efficient with the time. And then it does make people feel a little bit more comfortable too, that they're not just sitting there wondering, how they fit and what do they need to do and when to do it.
So lots more work for you as we go on. Patricia, this has been amazing. I know that we've put in the chat where people can get the book, but please, for anybody that's either you're somebody that thinks, I just want to get better figuring out how to be online, or if I'm part of a leadership team, or people just wanting to learn some of these things. I know that you have a lot in the book, but also that you do actual consultation as well. Tell people where they can reach you and in what ways you can help.
Yeah, thank you, Roxanne. regiereducation.com is my website. You can definitely connect with me, book a consultation. I work with, variety of different services we offer. But you can also, in addition to the book, there's the e-copy that's on a special price right now. The physical copy is fantastic. I created it so it's like pick your own adventure. You can jump around and just pick a couple things to work on. But I also create YouTube videos and blogs and articles once a week. So there's tips and tutorials there as well. And that's on my YouTube channel, Patricia Regier. So I welcome people to check out the information in a variety of different ways and connect and let me know what you're interested in talking about.
Again, thank you. And congratulations on the new book. That's amazing. So what am I taking away? I'm taking away that when I think about being authentic, that's kind of scary sometimes if it's a new platform. So take the time, educate yourself, take your pulse, kind of how stressed am I? What do I need to do to come back into my body or whatever before I go on camera? And I have to keep that camera on. So for people listening that are wanting to know more about how do I understand my authenticity, we've put into the link as well, as you know, I said my new book, ROR, Return on Relationships, is coming out the end of this month, beginning of May. But before that, if you want to know how authentic you are in relationships, you can check out the link, roxannederhodge.com/quiz, and it'll give you the options. If you're looking just to know how am I at home or how am I at work, you'll go through a bit of an assessment. It'll send you the results. And so take the time. It's just a couple minutes and it gives you some information. Again, Patricia, thanks so much for your time. For everybody, we survived week number 2 without too many glitches. So look forward to seeing you again next Thursday at 11. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Roxanne. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to Authentic Living with Roxanne, creating the space for positive, healthy change. Roxanne is a keynote speaker, psychotherapist, and coach. To work with Roxanne, visit roxannederhodge.com/blueprint. We'll see you next time on Authentic Living with Roxanne.